You are now experiencing one of the greatest witnesses of human history. How the Cold War changed Nicaragua. Introduction. When most people think about the Cold War, they think of the United States and the Soviet Union. However, many of the most important Cold War conflicts actually took place in smaller countries far from Washington and Moscow. One of these countries was Nicaragua. Located in Central America between Honduras and Costa Rica, Nicaragua became a major battleground in the global struggle between capitalism and communism. During the Cold War, foreign powers influenced Nicaragua's government, economy, and society. Revolutions, civil wars, and international intervention transformed the country, leaving effects that can still be seen today. To understand how the Cold War changed Nicaragua, you must need to first understand what it was like before the Cold War began.
Al periodista Alfonso Rojo, que fue capturado en el campo enemigo, quiero decir lo que esos son los riesgos que se toman los periodistas que se ponen al margen de las leyes que manejan.
This was Anastasio Somoza Garcia, who gained control of the government and established a political dynasty that would last for more than 4 decades. The United States strongly supported the Somoza regime, as American leaders viewed the government as stable and friendly to U.S. economic interests. Because of this support, the Somoza family was able to maintain power despite accusations of corruption and political repression. Economically, Nicaragua depended heavily on agriculture, with coffee, bananas, cattle, cotton, and gold among the country's most important exports. Large landowners and wealthy elites benefited from these industries, but many farmers and laborers remained poor. Life for ordinary people was also difficult, as access to healthcare, education, and economic opportunity was limited. Many families struggled to improve their living conditions, while the wealth generated by exports often remained concentrated among a small percentage of the population. These inequalities created frustration and resentment among many Nicaraguans. Over time, opposition groups began to organize against the dictatorship. One important influence was Augusto Cesar Sandino, a nationalist leader who fought against U.S. military occupation during the 1920s and 1930s. Although Sandino was assassinated in 1934, his ideas inspired future revolutionaries.
After World War II, tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union divided much of the world into competing political camps. The United States sought to prevent the spread of communism, while the Soviet Union supported socialist and communist movements around the world. Because Nicaragua was already governed by a strongly anti-communist regime, the United States continued supporting the Somoza family during the early Cold War. At first, the economy grew, with cotton production expanding rapidly during the 1950s and 60s, becoming one of the country's most valuable exports. Industrialization increased, and Nicaragua participated in regional economic development through the Central American Common Market. However, economic growth did not solve the country's deeper problems. Many citizens believed that government corruption prevented wealth from being distributed fairly. A turning point came in 1972 when a powerful earthquake devastated Managua, Nicaragua's capital city. Thousands of people died, and large portions of the city were destroyed. Many Nicaraguans became angry when reports emerged that members of the Somoza government had misused relief funds and profited from the reconstruction efforts. As dissatisfaction increased, support for the Sandinista movement grew dramatically.
By the late 1970s, Nicaragua was approaching a breaking point. The Sandinista National Liberation Front united students, workers, farmers, intellectuals, and political opponents who wanted to remove the Somoza dictatorship. In 1979, after years of fighting, the Sandinistas successfully overthrew President Anastasio Somoza Debayle. For many Nicaraguans, the revolution represented hope for a more equal society. The new government launched ambitious social programs aimed at improving education, healthcare, and literacy. One of the Sandinistas' most famous achievements was a nationwide literacy campaign. Thousands of volunteers traveled throughout the country teaching people how to read and write. Literacy rates improved significantly as a result. The government also attempted land reforms and expanded access to healthcare in rural areas. However, the revolution quickly became entangled in Cold War politics. The Sandinista government developed relationships with Cuba and the Soviet Union. Although the Sandinistas argued that they were pursuing independence and social justice, many American leaders believed Nicaragua was becoming a communist ally. This perception would dramatically shape the country's future.
The election of President Ronald Reagan in the United States marked a major turning point. Reagan viewed the Sandinista government as a threat to American interests in Central America. He feared that Nicaragua could become a base for Soviet influence in the Western Hemisphere. As a result, the United States began supporting anti-Sandinista rebel groups, known collectively as the Contras. The Contra War became one of the most significant proxy conflicts of the Cold War. While the Sandinistas received support from communist countries, the Contras received assistance from the United States. Although the superpowers never directly fought each other, Nicaragua became the battlefield where their rivalry played out. The war caused tremendous suffering. Thousands of people were killed, injured, or displaced. Infrastructure, such as roads, bridges, and public facilities, were damaged. Economic activity slowed as resources were redirected towards military spending. The conflict also divided communities and families. Political disagreements became deeply personal, and many citizens found themselves caught between opposing sides. One of the most controversial aspects of the conflict was the Iran-Contra affair. Members of the Reagan administration secretly sold weapons to Iran and used part of the money to support the Contras despite restrictions imposed by Congress. This scandal became international news and demonstrated how important Nicaragua had become in the Cold War strategy.
By 1990, both the war and economic crisis had exhausted much of the country. The Sandinistas lost power, and Nicaragua began a transition toward peace. The end of the Cold War reduced foreign involvement and allowed Nicaragua to focus on rebuilding its economy and political institutions. However, many challenges remained, including poverty, inequality, and political division. In 2007, former Sandinista leader Daniel Ortega returned to the presidency. Today, Nicaragua officially remains a constitutional republic, however, his policies are viewed as increasingly authoritarian.
The Cold War changed Nicaragua in almost every way imaginable. Before the Cold War, Nicaragua was governed by a US-backed dictatorship. During the Cold War, revolution and civil war transformed the political system, drawing the country to a global struggle between the US and the Soviet Union. The Sandinista Revolution, the Contra War, economic crises, and political conflict reshaped the nation, affecting millions of lives. Even today, Nicaragua's politics, economy, and society continue to reflect the legacy of the Cold War events.